In February 1796, a crowd gathered in Paris to watch the government destroy something. Not a monument, not a symbol of the old regime. Printing plates, the machinery that had created the assignat, France's revolutionary paper currency. For 6 years, these presses had churned out money faster than anyone could count it. By the end, 45 billion assignats were in circulation, enough paper to bury the country, and all of it, every single note, was worthless. This is the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Everyone knows about Germany's hyperinflation in the 1920s. Wheelbarrows full of marks to buy bread, the Weimar Republic collapsing under the weight of worthless paper. But that wasn't the first time a modern nation destroyed its currency. France did it first, and they did it 130 years earlier. The assignat hyperinflation of 1795 to 1796 was the first case of hyperinflation in Western Europe, the first time a government printed fiat money into oblivion. And the lessons from that disaster shaped monetary policy for the next 2 centuries. To understand how France inflated itself into ruin, you need to go back to 1789. The Ancien regime was bankrupt. King Louis XVI had spent decades funding wars, palaces, and a bloated aristocracy. The treasury was empty, the debt was crushing, and the people were starving. On July 14, 1789, revolutionaries stormed the Bastille. Within months, the monarchy was gone. The National Assembly seized power, and they inherited a financial catastrophe. The solution seemed obvious. France owned vast amounts of land. The Catholic Church controlled roughly 10% of all property in France, worth an estimated 2 to 3 billion livres. The revolutionaries confiscated it, every monastery, every cathedral estate, every vineyard and farm owned by the clergy, and they used that land as collateral for a new currency, the assignat, a paper note backed by church property. Issued in December 1789, the first assignats paid 3% interest. They were supposed to be bonds, claims on seized land that could be redeemed at auction. The plan was simple: issue assignats, sell church property, burn the notes when they came back, reduce the debt, balance the budget, save France. It worked, at first. The first wave of assignats injected liquidity into a frozen economy. Businesses reopened, trade resumed, people had money to spend, confidence returned. By 1791, France looked like it was recovering. But then the government made a fatal decision. It stopped burning the assignats. Instead of retiring the notes as church land sold, it reissued them. Then it printed more, and more, because the wars had started. In April 1792, France declared war on Austria and Prussia. By 1793, it was fighting nearly every major power in Europe. War required money, massive amounts of it. Soldiers needed pay. Weapons needed manufacturing. Supply lines needed funding. But the government couldn't raise taxes. The revolution had been sparked by tax revolts. Asking citizens to pay more would trigger another uprising. So the National Assembly did the only thing it could. It printed assignats, billions of them. By early 1793, and the volume of assignats in circulation exceeded the value of the confiscated church property backing them. The notes were no longer asset-backed bonds. They were fiat currency, paper money with no intrinsic value. And the government kept printing, because it had no choice. Stop printing, and the army collapses. The war is lost, the revolution fails. Print more, and maybe, just maybe, prices stay stable long enough to win. They didn't. Inflation started slowly. In 1790, an assignat traded at par with metallic livre. By 1793, it had lost 50% of its value. By 1794, 70%. And then the collapse accelerated. In May 1795, political support for the assignat fractured. The Jacobins, the radical left faction that had championed the currency, lost power. A failed insurrection in Paris weakened their control of the National Assembly. And then suddenly the promise that assignats would be backed by land sales became worthless. Because the new government, the Directory, didn't care about that promise. The public panicked. If the government wouldn't honor its commitment to retire assignats, the notes had no backing, no value. Nothing. People rushed to spend them before they became completely worthless. Velocity spiked. Prices exploded. By November 1795, 19.7 billion assignats were circulating. Their value had declined 99% since 1790. Inflation in August 1796 peaked at 304%. Not annually, monthly. That's hyperinflation by any definition, the kind where money loses half its value in 50 days. Let's be specific about what this meant. In 1790, a loaf of bread cost a few sous in metallic currency or equivalent assignats. By 1796, where that same loaf cost hundreds of assignats, wages couldn't keep up. Workers were paid in the morning, and their money was worthless by evening. Farmers refused to sell crops for paper. They demanded gold or silver, but France had run out of precious metals. It had exported them to pay for foreign supplies during the war. The assignats became compulsory legal tender. By law, you had to accept them, but nobody wanted them. The government tried price controls. The law of the maximum, enacted in 1793, set maximum prices for food, fuel, and essential goods. Violators faced the guillotine, death for charging too much for bread. But price controls don't stop inflation. They just create shortages. Bakers stopped baking because they couldn't afford flour at controlled prices. Farmers stopped bringing goods to market. Black markets flourished. And the executions began. Thousands were killed, not for treason or counter-revolution, but for economic crimes, for trying to survive hyperinflation. By December 1794, the government repealed the law of the maximum. Prices were allowed to float, and they skyrocketed. In early 1795, the government permitted the export of precious metals in exchange for imported food. Desperation policy. France was starving, and its currency was dying. By October 1795, inflation peaked. The assignat, once worth a livre, traded at 1/500th its original value. Some accounts report prices increasing 500 times compared to 1790 levels. The overall stock of assignats was 20 times larger than France's original metallic money supply. The printing presses had destroyed the currency. In December 1795, the government stopped printing assignats. In February 1796, the printing plates were destroyed in a public ceremony. The assignat was dead. But France tried one last experiment. The mandat, a new paper currency, this one backed by gold. It was supposed to restore confidence, to give people something stable to hold. But the damage was done. Trust in paper money had evaporated. The mandat began depreciating before it was even issued. It lasted until February 1797. Another failure, another currency destroyed. In all, 2.5 billion mandats and 45 billion assignats had been printed, all of it worthless. France didn't recover until Napoleon. He stabilized the currency in 1803 by introducing the franc, a silver coin defined as 5 grams of 90% pure silver. No paper, no promises, just metal. And only then did prices stabilize. Only then did trust return. And the hyperinflation had lasted from 1795 to 1797, but the economic and social damage lasted decades. Here's the detail that makes this story permanent. The assignat hyperinflation wasn't caused by stupidity. It was caused by necessity. The French government faced impossible choices. Raise taxes and trigger revolt. Stop printing money and lose the war. Default on debt and collapse entirely. Or print assignats and hope inflation stayed manageable. They chose printing, and for a while it worked. The economy grew. The war was funded. The revolution survived. But the end point was always the same. Once you start printing fiat money to cover deficits, stopping becomes politically impossible. Every minister who suggested fiscal restraint was removed. Every economist who warned about inflation was ignored. Because the alternative, an immediate collapse, was unthinkable. This is why the assignat matters today. It wasn't the first time a government debased currency. The Romans did that for centuries. But it was the first modern hyperinflation, the first time a nation-state issued pure fiat currency, backed only by promises, and watched it disintegrate when those promises were broken. And it established the template: budget deficits, war financing, paper money creation, political pressure to keep printing, Loss of confidence, velocity spike, price explosion, currency collapse. Every hyperinflation since, Germany, Hungary, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, has followed the same script. The Weimar Republic is famous because it happened in the 20th century, because photographs exist, because it contributed to the rise of the Nazis. But France did it first. And they did it without precedent, without warning signs from history. The assignat was an experiment, a revolutionary idea that paper backed by confiscated land could replace precious metals. It failed catastrophically, and the failure taught the world a lesson it keeps forgetting. Fiat money works only as long as people believe in it, and belief, once shattered, doesn't return. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.